For a quick rundown of who we are, SkyPyre Studios is an Ottawa-based indie game studio. We also do multimedia design work such as video, motion graphics, and graphic design, but we mainly focus on game development. We started in university where we became friends, and then we decided to keep going with it after our senior project and made an actual company. And here we are about 3 years later. We actually started at 6 people, and most recently, only a few months ago, I think it was, or about a year ago maybe now. Yeah, this year's going really quick. We're up to 8 people now, and we strive to create unique and fun experiences for both viewers and players alike. So, the Blobs Fight. It started off as a 2 to 8 player couch co-op local multiplayer game, kind of like other games like Gang Beasts or more recently Fall Guys. That kind of game, however, very local. It's only a in person. There is no online multiplayer, and the reason for that was to try to get the get people together or to play together in person, and we found that playing online has a different atmosphere and different vibe when you're playing with friends, so we want to capture that. Later on, we added a 1 to 8 player mode called Blobs, and that basically allows players to work together or alone and face off a bunch of AI robots coming to attack their defense points. The original planned time was 6 months tops. If you notice the title of this presentation, we said from 6 months to 3 years. We'll get into why that was, but that's the original timeline. The actual core development time from start to official release was 1 year, or a little less so, from August to June of 2017 to 2018. And then about, a few weeks ago on Xbox, just this year. And then the final big update for Steam and the game itself was in November of 2019, when we actually added the final bits of Blobs and little tweaks here and there. There's a few reasons why the game might have taken a few months longer than 6 months. A big one is that we're part-time. We're very much part-time. Some indies, depending on how successful their games are and whatnot, can go full-time, but we just started out from school and just went right into it, so we still had, coming out of school, there's a lot of debt involved and whatnot, so you still have jobs. So all of us are full-time or at least part-time employed. Let me see here. We only have... Generally speaking, from week to week, it varies, but roughly 5 hours per week per person is what we can almost guarantee, because we also have lives outside of SkyPyre. Scope issues, that can probably resonate pretty well with certain indies and other people. Scope can be an issue because you always get the idea of, oh, this feature would be cool, or these additions or whatever, and then you have to realize, wait a minute, this is way too much, or this is getting too big for us to even do, or at least within the time allotted. So we had to rein back a few things. We had to rethink how certain mechanics would work if we added all these features, which by extension, obviously, it came out to about 3 years. Let me see, customization, we added that relatively early, but that's a big feature in that you can't just add 3 costumes and be done with it. You have to add multiple things to make it worthwhile. And we also have 9 unique maps on the base game modes, but then added 3 other ones with Blobs. So there's 12 unique 12 unique maps that all have to work with all of our game modes, and for all from 1 to 8 players. So it's quite the challenge for us to do that, but we got around to it. Working from home, before it was cool. There was a good chunk of time where one of our members, David, one of our members, Michael, had to go away for school or for work off in a different city. So for a long time, 2 of our members were logging in through Discord on our meetings, but weren't ever present. So communication was key, but it was very hard to really get the productivity going. It's harder when you're isolated, and I think we all feel that now, especially. Let's see here. Also, we call Michael the scope police because he's often the guy who brings up, hey, this is maybe too much right now, or maybe we should rethink this aspect, and we didn't have him for some time, which could have impacted some of our scope decisions. Lead us not into temptation. That is a reference to maybe thinking about other games, other ideas that, oh, that would be cool to work on this other project. And I think a lot of indies will find that, after a while, maybe, you've been working on the same game or the same project for a while, you may want to look to other horizons. And this actually caused us to basically put Blobs on hiatus for 3 months or so, which doesn't help. And for those 3 months, we worked diligently on a pre-production of something else we want to work on eventually, but it did very much push back the release date for Blobs. I would also say that relying on an asset pack, on an asset from the asset store for the core gameplay is a challenge in and of itself. Since you didn't make it, might not understand all of the code that makes it work, and have to kind of make a game around that and try to not break it as you're making a game. And we found a bunch of problems figuring that out. It ended up working in the end, but that was a lot of iteration and trying to figure out what was happening with this thing that we didn't even make, but we had to use as our core gameplay, or as our core for the game. Talking to a wall, solving the senseless bug, that we'll be talking a bit more when we get to the Xbox development cycle. But yeah, multiple reasons. So the previously talked about asset store asset is called Jelly Mesh, and it creates this sort of gelatinous physics-based blob, which is what the core of the blobs are. And it made many problems, as seen here. So on the left here, this GIF is an early version within like the first 2 weeks, maybe even not even that, like a few days maybe, of us testing out physics, and it does some weird stuff. Also on the right, that's a blob going off into the stratosphere due to physics. We had to squash those bugs. Next one. So here's another one. The game just started. Players haven't done anything, and then the game does this. So we had to figure out how to fix that. One of the ways we did it, I wasn't part of the actual programming team, so I can't go into super high details, but one of the ways that we did try to fix lag, as well as just computational calculations and avoiding this, was to maximize the number of physics calls or physics calculations that were made. So I think we reduced that to be once every 3 frames or so that if one of the physics nodes in a blob hit a wall, there was less of a chance that it would go through that wall and thus getting stuck, and then the blob would just split like this one, or whatever the heck would cause all these issues. So yeah.
So after we released on PC, one of our extra goals was to release onto consoles. We investigated all 3 consoles. We were able to veto PlayStation because they only support 4 players locally, and our game supported 8. So we didn't really have to go too far there. We tried to get on Nintendo, but we were unfortunately rejected. Luckily, Xbox said, "Yeah, we'll give you guys a shot." If only I'd have known how much work that would have been. In here, I have a section called Achievements, Save Data, Why. If you make a game on Xbox, you have to have achievements. You can't get around that. If you have a game on Xbox, it needs achievements. You can't say otherwise. And if you need achievements, you need to have some sort of save data. And Blobs was never designed to have either of these things. So my job throughout most of the Xbox development time was finding a way to manipulate the code base that we already had into a way that we could get it to work on a console with relative ease. And I feel like I came up with a pretty elegant solution. Everything that I'm saying here is, as far as I am understanding, not violating an NDA. But if there are any NDA violations, please don't snitch. So one of the main components for the save data was just this simple struct that I made that contains all of the save data that I wanted to track, which would involve what maps you played on, what game modes you've played, how many blobs that you've killed, how many mobs that you've killed, which were our AI enemy, how many bits you picked up, which were those little there's these little circle dots that you can pick up to make yourself bigger. We tracked all of those. And also the first time launched, because I felt like giving people who bought our game a freebie achievement as a thank you for actually buying our game. I wound up using properties to store to do gets and sets for most of the values, which worked spectacularly for triggering our achievements, except for with Boolean arrays, because I guess Boolean arrays, if you do a property, it doesn't quite work the way I expected it to, where the set doesn't really trigger properly unless the whole array gets set. So what I was trying to do was every time a new map played Boolean got flipped, it would update a percentage on the achievement, but that didn't work for whatever reason C# has. I'm not really sure why. But luckily, it worked for all of the other achievements that I wanted to trigger. And when I came to triggering achievements, I was able to come up with a certain kind of event-style trigger for updating achievements, where all I have to do is call the static method on the event with the ID of the achievement and the percentage that it's completed. So this is an example for our Blobs Killed achievement, where each milestone, it updates the relevant achievements to its specific percentage. This was the event that I quickly wrote. Basically, you've got the event handler that handles the achievement arguments and the achievement unlocked. When you invoke the event, it runs a quick check afterwards. If the progress is greater than or equal to 100, that could probably just be equal to 100, but I wanted to err on the safe side in case something stupid happened. Then I just unlocked the achievement. And that wound up working almost perfectly. The only downside is that all of Xbox API's methods are asynchronous. And asynchronous programming is a massive pain in the ass. So what I wound up having to do in the class that I handle all of the Xbox API connections is have an enumerator for the state of the game, where basically I go through each step of what the APIs would be doing. So it it mounts the storage, it's available for doing pre-existing operations. Looking to see if a save file already exists, if not, creating an empty save, saving, loading, and then of course errors in case something goes wrong. Even now, I'm not 100% sure how I managed to pull off the asynchronous programming for this. It just kind of worked and I rolled with it. And luckily, I finally had it working and I was able to record. If I open up the volume mixer just so I can turn this back up a bit. I thought I had it open and then I closed it, I guess. I can't find it. I was able to record the moment that our first achievement triggered on our dev kit. And it should... Yes! So I sent that achievement or that video to our team on Slack. I think at that point it was 8 months after we started actually developing, like after we received our dev kit from Xbox and started working at it. There were a bunch of reasons why it took that long. The APIs were hard to understand at first. The documentation wasn't very good. And it was just a lot of me just banging my head against a wall trying to make things happen. And then finally it happened, and as you could tell from the video, I was very excited about it. Now this is something, a little bit of a fun story about our game. We decided to come up with an achievement because we have a lava level. We of course had to come up with a Star Wars reference to match it. So we came up with an achievement to say, hey, if you can counter a blob that's attacking you into the lava, we'll give you this achievement. And I was thinking, oh no, this achievement is going to be really, really hard to figure out because there's so many systems that are interacting that you have to pay attention to and make sure that everything happens in the proper way. What I failed to realize was that all of the code that I needed to do that was in one file, which is probably a bad idea, and I definitely wouldn't recommend that to anyone else, but that's just the way it was. And the code to trigger that achievement was this. It was just a Boolean value saying if you were countered within a certain amount of time and you're playing on the lava map, you get the achievement. That was the achievement I was most afraid of triggering because everything else is pretty straightforward. It's, kill X many things, play every map, play every game mode, play with eight people. Those are all relatively straightforward. This one I thought was going to be the most complex, and luckily it wasn't. Thank goodness. Now, there are some problems, obviously, with developing on Xbox. The main one being that everything is under NDA, which means if you want to talk about certain API things, you can't just Google it. You can't just go on Stack Overflow and make a post and get the advice of hundreds of thousands of people. It just won't work because everything's under contractual obligation that you should not speak. The only resources that are available are either Xbox's or Unity's forums and the aforementioned documentation, which honestly wasn't very good. So the biggest challenge for me was having to rely on my own programming knowledge, which admittedly is not very good. And you just kind of have to crack away at it and hope that everything you do works properly, which I consider ourselves very lucky that I was able to figure everything out in a way that passed Xbox's standards. Now, earlier we mentioned talking to a wall, aka the unsolvable bug. You're getting a sneak peek into some of our Slack chats from the first time we submitted our build to Xbox for certification. On June the 11th, we received notification that we didn't pass for two reasons. One was that if you put the game in a suspended state, so if you were to hit the home button on Xbox and go to a different application, and then go back to the game, the app died instead of bringing you back to where you were before. So that was an unfortunate one, but luckily I knew how to fix that. I had refactored the code that does that and just kind of forgot to put that in. So that one was on me. This other reason says that the certification team couldn't trigger our achievements, even though they were able to, they were able to see what the achievement was. They just couldn't trigger it despite doing what should have triggered it. We had a plan to release the game on June 21st, which would have been the 2-year anniversary of our release on Steam, but obviously that didn't happen. When I tested the achievements on our dev kit, it worked fine. All of our achievements triggered. I reset all of our dev accounts and tested on all of them, and everything was fine. So I sent them an email asking if they tested the achievements using our accounts, because I hadn't reset the accounts before I sent the game for submission, so if the game already had the achievement, obviously it wouldn't unlock. I wound up learning that they use their own accounts in an entirely different sandbox, so that wasn't the problem. And later on I mentioned that one of the things that we failed for certification worked in a dev build, but as soon as we changed it to a production build, it didn't work. So I wasn't really sure what to do, and I sent an email to Xbox support saying, "Hey, we failed for this, and I don't really know why. Can someone tell us why?" And I didn't hear back for a month and a half. On July 28th, I finally heard back from some people on Unity's forums and and by email, and I think on the Ottawa Game Devs Slack channel. I think I may have reached out on there. And what I found out was if I were to package the game the way you normally do when you submit it to Xbox to go to retail, and I tested that, the achievements didn't work. I still didn't know why, but I knew at least where the problem was. And then I saw some advice that it might have been the way that Unity was encrypting the package that may have caused the problem. And it's something that we've come across before, as we mentioned twice. Good old Unity build issues. Any other Unity developer in here, I'm sure, can relate to that. And then I finally figured out what it was. So in Unity's player settings for Xbox, there are certain areas where you have to put numbers that are assigned to you by Microsoft, like SCIDs and game IDs and all of that. And I put those into where the documentation told me to put those IDs. And I assumed everything was fine. I was wrong, of course, but I was able to finally trace what the problem was and get our achievements working in a proper packaged build. And it was this. So this is the player settings for Unity for our game. We've got our title ID assigned by Microsoft. We've got a service config ID also assigned by Microsoft. But what they don't tell you is if you're making a package, you also have to put the service ID down here, or the package won't know what game it is and won't be able to trigger the achievements. I don't know why it's like that. I don't know why Unity can't just say, oh, this should be the same as the service config ID. That wound up getting me very angry when I figured out that that's what it was. But on August the 3rd, we received a certification report from Xbox, and we passed. And we were able to finally start getting ready for market release and get our marketing materials ready. That's a whole other story, Matt. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that. But after over a year of just struggling and pain, we were finally able to get the game marketed to people on Xbox.
So before I go into these points, I'll just elaborate on what Tyson was referring to there. I'm the marketing lead for SkyPyre. I take care of social media and all the outreach and that sort of stuff. And in this case, once we passed certification and all of the actual game was working, basically Blobs was, in a way, handed over to me for the weeks coming up to release, which was just last month, to really hype up the game, get word out that it was coming out. And since this was our first real interaction with a console, previously it was just Steam, and Steam is fairly straightforward. You upload the game and you have access to everything. Microsoft is the way it's set up, it seems to be a lot of small compartmentalized groups, little sections, which makes sense for organization. However, when we reach out, specifically when I reached out for marketing, so I was like, hey, are there any rules that I should follow? Are there any materials that you guys want us to use that I have to use? Any sort of requirements here? Much like how Tyson didn't hear anything for a month and a half, luckily for me, it wasn't so long, but it was still a few weeks before I heard anything from their side saying, oh yes, by the way, there are some things that for like the trailer, for example, the trailer has to have the Xbox intro and the Xbox outro, but I only found out because I asked. Same thing with reaching out on social media. Now in that, they didn't really care particularly. I don't think they want you, like any other company, they don't want you to mess with their logo or anything. but they didn't really have any specifics on that. But again, I had to wait a few weeks for an email to come in saying, no, you're good. But again, because I asked, not because Microsoft went, okay, you're ready to launch, here's everything you need to know, and here's everything you need. So I found that very frustrating on my end because I didn't know what to ask, really. Luckily, I have enough experience with marketing that, I had a vague notion, but this was also my first time on console. So specifics for that is hard to gauge, especially for such a big company like Microsoft. So that's just a fair warning. Do not expect an hour later for them to answer. Give yourself time. Make sure that you know what you want to ask, and if you don't, then try to be very specific in your questions, because once you send your email, it's not like, oh, and another thing, and they'll respond within the day. So that was something, but luckily enough, I got the answers that I needed, and it didn't really mess anything up with my plans, so we were able to move forward with marketing. So for Blobs as a whole, some lessons learned. Way at the beginning of Blobs, we had just graduated university. We got our diplomas in June. Okay, awesome. We just set up our company. We're like, all right, let's do this. We're going to start making this game called Blobs. All right. And then about 2 weeks after that decision, I'd already, it just, I don't know, some circumstances happened, and I just we had to act quick to get in on entering the CNE, which was the first, and they were hosting their first gaming garage. For those who don't know, the CNE is the Canadian National Exhibition, has been going on for many, many years in Toronto. It's the biggest expo in Canada. However, it's not specific to one thing, it's like everything. And this was the first year they were having a gaming specific location. And part of the reason why it was so urgent that I, get in and do all this stuff was because this was their first time doing this, and they had a sponsor paying for everyone's booths. All the I forget how many, 15 indies or so, were going to get free booths, whoever got accepted first. So urgency. So I got us in, but we had just barely started on anything for this game. So I think it was David and Michael, maybe Andrew, but I really remember David and Michael pushing out in 2 weeks, pushing out a build version of the game that was stable enough to work. We had not tested any maps. We had tested the mechanics to an extent, so in general sense, the core gameplay was already there, just tweaks along the way. But the maps from that con to later on, completely different, because we learned so much from that weekend. So a lesson learned from that would be try not to book a con within 2 weeks of you just coming up with a concept, because then you have to have something. You can't just, I guess you could, but generally speaking, you're going to a con, you have to have something playable for people. You can't just be like, yes, we have a concept. Huh? So it's kind of hard to market a game that way. So I would suggest having a bit more time before going to something like that. Relying on assets can cause issues. So like we said before, with bugs, for physics-based bugs with the jelly mesh, if you can, try to make your own assets. Try to make especially something that's the core foundation of your game. Maybe make it yourself and not rely on something that someone else has made that you might not understand fully, because that caused many issues. And now we don't know how things would have been if we had made our own, but I would like to think that a lot of those physics bugs that kept coming back because we did something would probably have been avoided, or at least squashed quicker, because we actually made the code. We knew exactly what was happening everywhere. Yes, when you send out, all right, so for marketing advice, when you send out a game to be played by any influencers, so that's, I guess, reviewers for blogs and articles, but very specifically for streamers and YouTubers, you have to, quote unquote, teach them. You don't have to necessarily be there with them and tell them, but in your email or in whatever you're communicating with them, tell them exactly, don't be very broad, be pretty precise, like, hey, here's how we think you should play the game. Here's the settings to use to be the maximum potential. Just because as a what's the word? Proof of concept? No, it's like as proof, is that we sent out our game to, I think it was, it was an achievement hunter.
It was Kind of Funny.
Kind of Funny, thank you. We sent our game to a Kind of Funny, huge opportunity, and they actually played it, which is amazing. However, our game has many settings that players can mess around with, and basically you have base settings for each game mode, and the players can mess with those settings to make their own game modes or play it however they want. One of the settings is no timer, i.e. play forever until someone wins. Unfortunately, for this playthrough, I don't think they realized it was on forever, or they didn't realize the implication that if they didn't fight each other to the death, the game wouldn't end. So for a good, what was it?
I think it was about 7 minutes.
10, 15 minutes or something. They played the same game, which was our least exciting map as well, unfortunately. That map has been revamped since, but that was our least exciting map at the time, and they had no timer, so the game would go on forever, and at some points they didn't feel engaged to have to fight each other. Sometimes they'd have little brawls, but they had no reason to really go at each other, which extended the runtime, which extended their play, and they just kind of drifted off and kind of got bored, or at least it felt that way. Unfortunately, that's a really, really, really bad first impression for the public. So be sure to teach your influencers. And unfortunately for us, the game was already released, but we were re-releasing it on Xbox, and unfortunately it's a pandemic, and our game is local only, which is a big hurdle. It works for a household, but you can't invite your friends over very easily. So that was a big hurdle that I had to, while reaching out by email to all these journalists and influencers and whatnot, I had to include that it's not online, because otherwise people just kind of people seem to assume that it is, and I feel like that probably hurt some of our responses. So and as a tie-in to that, multiplayer these days is basically a must, especially this year, but just in general. If you're making a local multiplayer game, try to have a multiplayer aspect of it, online multiplayer, because a lot of people will find it much more appealing for sales, but also just for people just to have fun. Sometimes it's logistically it's just harder for people to come together. So
imagine a game like Among Us if you could only play it locally.
Yeah. So don't lessons learned from us. Don't make our mistakes. Yes, just a quick overview of the game itself. This was our first game made on our own, no school support. Previous to this, we'd done, game jams and whatnot, and then a bunch of projects at school. But again, those were using school resources, school software, school time. Time is a big one. At school, we were always in person as well. So being in person, especially for our team, I don't know, I'm sure it's similar for many other teams, but we found that while we worked together in the same room, we were much more productive than separate. And we've been learning to get better at that, but it makes a world of a difference. And this was our first game made on our own, which is probably also why it took a bit longer. It was also our first multiplayer party game. The game, this was our first time making this kind of game. Our previous one was a third-person single-player adventure called Halen, and it's completely different. A sci-fi adventure, lots of story. The player can take their time, and there's no huge hurdles. It's one person looking at one screen, whereas in our case, we had to learn how to create arenas that everyone could be seen at all times, and everything is very clear. We have 8 people. you have to make it, 4 people is somewhat manageable, but 8 people, that's doubling, and there's a lot of movement. It's very fast paced, so we had to learn how to really tweak those mechanics and make it visually clear within a few seconds. Okay, that's me, and I won't lose myself, and this is what's happening. It was also our first platform release on Steam back in 2018. That was a good learning process, which eased us into our first console last month with Xbox. I would say that if we had done both at the same time, it would have been a big learning process as well. But I feel like since it was our first time, it would have been too overwhelming, especially with the amount of time that we can allot per week for game development. And if you can, try not to release your game 2 years apart twice.
Yeah, having a big break in between really kills the motivation to finish a game.
Yeah.
Very badly.
So here's some early development pictures. So the top left there, I believe, was the first menu, because again, when we went to the CNE, that was within 2 weeks of us starting to develop anything. So we had to just come up with base mechanics, threw a map together, and I just threw that together like, hey, here's how you play, go. And then on the top right there, that's from Comic-Con. We didn't have enough room on our table, so we had to figure it out and strap a keyboard to the monitor. So that's some top tips for behind the scenes at a con. Bottom left is not the first map, surprisingly. That is an early iteration of the castle map which was the basis of all of our maps from here on out. This is the first map that we created post CNE, because we'd learned so much about what works and doesn't work in a map. Specifically, they should be more round, fairly level, not many stories high, and don't have things that crush the blobs generally, don't have things that squish them, otherwise physics will take hold and you'll get stuck in walls. And on the bottom right is I believe the first block out of any map ever. So that's probably within a few days of development. And which leads us to here. This is what we ended up with. As you can tell, the game, generally speaking, the combat, the core gameplay is there. There are some tweaks to, values, speeds, cooldowns, that kind of stuff. Visually, obviously, is very different. But the blobs themselves, the movement, apart from a couple tweaks here and there, they're the same. Maps, however, all have this circular, fairly flat, very open concept. There are different hazards that'll attack you, but nothing that actually obstructs players' views at any point, except for maybe the crusher on factory, and even that's only there for like a split second. So on that, I believe that's everything we had to talk about. If there are any questions.
Okay.
Sure, I can go ahead. Sorry, I was figuring out how to unmute. First of all, I want to say congrats on navigating survival. I guess what we would call minimal experience. That sounds pretty difficult, and I think it takes a lot of that. Most people kind of learn by joining a company first and seeing how it's done, and then building their own stuff. When you guys mentioned that we're giving streamers instructions on how to figure out parts of the game, it kind of made me think, like, did you guys have any luck setting up friends and family playtests beforehand to see where people would get stuck when they were first introduced to the game? Because I think normally that's what people try to do, but I was wondering if that was viable.
Friends and family feedback is a bit of a double-edged sword, because it's easy to get, but it's also incredibly biased. Where you had, if you show your game to your parents or your partner or someone that's close to you, there's a social obligation to be nice there most of the time. So it's definitely nice to have that feedback, but you can't, like, if you were to contrast that with feedback that we get from conventions, which was definitely our biggest sort of playtesting area and our best source of feedback, I think. Those are complete strangers, right? And they'll tell you most of the time how they feel, and if there's a thing they think that can be improved. Generally, strangers are obviously the better feedback, but family and friends can, of course, they have opinions, and I'm sure that they would give good critiques.
Yeah. So to go with that, to go back to the friends and family, yes, generally they'll be biased. However, some people, some people will be blunt, but those are fewer and far between versus strangers. And with conventions, like Tyson said, that was our main source of testing and feedback. And after every convention that we've left, we always had a ton, like multiple pages of notes and of feedback, of changes, of bug fixes, just from people talking to us, from people asking us questions, and people giving us feedback just straight up, like, hey, I don't think this works, or I think you should change this. And also just by people doing things that we would not have tried or expected at all, and they just go for it because they feel that that's how it should work. And we've discovered a lot of bugs and stuff like that and fixed them. The other thing about conventions is, like Tyson said, they're all strangers, especially with Blobs, which we didn't go out thinking, hey, we're gonna make a kids game. The game works for all ages, but kids really, really like the game. Really, really, really like the game. And we had multiple conventions, multiple days. Kids would just keep coming back day in, day out. The same kids would keep coming back all day long just to play the game again. And kids have no filter, as I think most of us know. So if something was bad, or if they didn't like something, they would tell you. They would, in fact, probably raise their voice and tell you really loudly. And it's like, hey, kid, I'm trying to sell my game. Shh. But no, it was all very welcome. But kids are, especially strangers' kids, who don't know you, who just see the game and go, this is good, or this is crap, will tell you without a second thought. So conventions are huge. Make sure you've tested before, but I wouldn't rely on friends and family. I would rely a lot more on strangers.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have picked such specific wording. What I had more in mind was just playtests in general before the streamers got. But it's really interesting about kids. That's worth noting. We should send all of these to kid testers first. Well, yeah. Child labor laws aside.
Yes, that's why we did most of our testing at conventions, because they're already there.
I see.
And it's not. It's like a weird. It's like a weird gray zone, because we're not holding. Because Q&A sessions are a thing, but that then you have to like have. Contracts or the NDAs and like you said, labor laws and kids and that whole nightmare. Whereas at a convention, they're just talking to you. You can take it how you will, but we're not actually holding a Q&A session, but they are giving us feedback. So, yeah.
I just saw a question in the text chat from Astrobyte. I don't know if this is the right place for this channel, and not a very technical question, but do you think you will consider what platforms you want to put the game on in advance for future projects? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. Never again am I going to try to port console-specific features into a game post-release, unless I have absolutely zero choice. I would not wish that hell on anyone. So absolutely 100% yes. We, for all of our future projects, we will be considering platform-specific requirements as early in development as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a quick follow-up regarding that in the PS4, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so like you said, when you're originally going with the platforms or consoles, you're like, oh, Nintendo turned us down. Xbox got us, and PS4 only has, I think, 4-player local co-op.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, we can't do it there. But is that like a case of like you guys would not want people playing it with only Max 4? Because I feel like it's like, I'm assuming, doable to say just the PS4 version only goes up to 4 players.
It's certainly
If you
doable.
really wanted to launch.
It's certainly doable. I think for us as the company, one of the big marketing, like one of the big aspects of our game that we were proud of, is the fact that we can support 8 players. There's not a whole lot of games on the market that can do that. And you kind of have to contrast the investment, the time requirement in supporting yet another console with, is it going to be worth it in the long run? And speaking for myself, I think that Xbox and Switch were our main marketing areas. Switch especially, because we felt like the Blobs Fight was going to be a perfect Switch game. Nintendo, I guess, believed otherwise, but definitely, Switch is like the right sort of market, the right sort of vibe for our kind of game, I guess. And Xbox had the 8-player support. I don't know, Nick or Matt, if you want to elaborate on that more, but that's sort of my opinion on it.
Matt, if you want, I can, because I was the one who was talking to Sony.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing too is when you're unlike Xbox and Nintendo, who both despite slow communication, as we come to learn with Xbox, Sony almost prides themselves internally on kind of the on the non-communication. I heard from several other developers, it's one of those, you reach out to them, and if they like you, they'll answer you. If they don't, you're never gonna know. Whereas Nintendo let us down softly, and Xbox obviously was like, yeah, sure.
All right, cool, thanks.
No problem.
So yeah, there's a question here in Meetup from Ari. What do we have? Did you have time where you decided maybe it was best not to have an Xbox release, especially with the complications that happened? Like, did you have to have a sit down and decide if you wanted to move forward?
For myself, yes. There were a lot of times where I sat down at my computer and thought, is it really worth the effort? And I mean,
the answer was yes.
The answer was yes, of course, because I'm a part of the company and I want it to succeed so that we have a chance of quitting our normal full-time jobs and getting to do game development full-time,
or at least get a little closer to it.
At least get a little closer to it, because it's definitely a passion. It's definitely a passion project for all of us. But that's kind of the thing where you just gotta kind of suck it up and persevere and hope for the best.
Would we ever bring it to Game Pass? Funny thing, we did apply to Game Pass. However, what did they say exactly? Well, if we did go ahead with Game Pass, the release would be pushed further back, which we didn't necessarily want. But also, in the long run, we got rejected from it anyway, so our release was still a go.
I mean, if you're competing with Doom Eternal, you don't really have a choice or a chance.
Yeah.
So, knowing what I know now, us being rejected from Game Pass makes a lot of sense.
So, yeah, we certainly tried. Tried, but unfortunately not.
We would have loved to be on Game Pass.
That would have been awesome. Oh well.
You
Right. Anyway, sorry.
You mentioned a lot of things that you think you could have done better, but what are some things that you ended up doing well, either accidentally or intentionally?
Accidentally or intentionally?
Well, there was the fact that almost all of our core game code is in one file. That was handy. Of course, I wasn't really there for the writing of that. That was more David and Andrew, really.
I think an aspect that we did pretty well was our map designs. None of them feel, because we have 9 maps, now 12 with the 3 other from Moblobs, none of them feel exactly the same, despite them having the similar design themes of relatively flat, circle, open, that sort of stuff. They all have their own unique theme, their own style of like where things are, the different combinations of hazards, and it really allows for players to change their gameplay and strategies depending on what map they're on, depending on how many players, and whether they're in teams or not, and also on the game mode as well, because we have like things like King of the Hill, Last Blob Standing, Deathmatch, so it already we have all these mechanics that work well with different game modes, but then the maps also accentuate those depending on how you want to play.
Also, if I can take a moment to stroke Nick's ego here, Nick being an experienced Unreal environment designer and map designer, having to suffer through Unity's, let's say, less than ideal lighting and or map creation methods, and still being able to come out with a product that looks pretty damn good, and definitely fits our whole game's vibe. Definitely deserves some special credit.
Ego stroked. And the last thing I'll add, as a kind of an accidental but useful thing that happened in the process, is in order to get the game onto Steam necessitated a number of steps for us as a Canadian company, which at the time we were a partnership.
Oh, that's right.
It took a number of different steps for us to get it from there to being allowed to be sold on Steam, which of course is an American company, but also an international reseller. So we had to do a number of things with our business that got us in a position where whenever we were putting it on Xbox however many weeks ago, we kind of got to a point where it's like, oh, they need all this information. It's like, oh, we got that. So it's put us in a very good position to have the rights, I should say, to sell things internationally and so on, which is it's obviously very useful going forward for future projects.
Yeah, for sure.
If I've got a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, starting out, what kind of skills did you have initially, and how have you seen those skills develop? So you mentioned working in Unity, C#. Did you know Unity? Did you know C# before? Marketing? What?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
where is the origin, and then where do you see yourself now with those skills?
Right.
So if I can start with myself, I was the 7th addition to the company. I joined in, what was it, like April or May of 2018, I think.
Yeah, you went to our convention in March,
Yeah.
and then like a month later.
Yeah, and then like a month later, I joined
we
onto
slapped
the
a
company.
Michael name tag on you and called you Michael because
Yes.
you technically weren't supposed to be there.
That was fun.
Anyway.
So I joined the company with 0 game dev experience. None. Nada. Nothing at all. Never opened Unity. Never opened Unreal. Never opened RPG Maker. No game dev experience. I was initially brought on to the company as a videographer, which was my most prominent skill set at the time, I think. I had already had some programming experience from school and from work and other stuff that I'd worked on, but never in a game. That changed in 2019 in January when I joined the rest of the SkyPyre team at the Global Game Jam at Carleton University. That was my first sort of head-first dive into game development in Unity and with C# and all that fun stuff. I was fortunate to have 2 very good teachers early on either side of me. One was Andrew, our lead programmer, and the other was Jason Hain from Spectrum Break. And both of them were very, very helpful at teaching me the early goings of Unity and all of its strengths and more so its weaknesses. And then from there, I branched onto the team in more of a programming manner, kind of ramping up until we got to the point where we got to Xbox development, and I basically said, okay, this is mine. This is my job. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to do whatever I can. In hindsight, probably shouldn't have done that. Probably should have spread the work among the team. But, hindsight's 20/20. I will say that forcing myself to take a lead role in that has certainly been advantageous, as I have sort of assumed the role of lead programmer for our next game. It gave me a lot more experience into game development. I learned a lot about more, I guess, advanced programming. I spent probably 4 or 5 months just researching new things in C# and Unity, like their dots framework, which they were working on. Which unfortunately now we've switched to Unreal, so all that's gone. It's all trash.
No, it's useful. It's useful.
I mean, it's programming knowledge. It can go anywhere. So for me, my journey has definitely been the strangest, where I started out with no game dev experience, and then a year and a bit later, I was in charge of all of the programming for a console release.
As for the rest of the team, like I said, the company was formed after our graduation, so we all graduated from the same class in the same program. So we'd known each other for 3-4 years by then, and we'd worked multiple times on different sized projects. And the program that we graduated from was the IMD program at Carleton, which taught us a variety of skills, many of which leads right into game development, which was very convenient for us because we all wanted to make games, and any open-ended project that allowed us to make any sort of gamey thing, we would basically make a game out of it. So it was just a very natural fit for us when we graduated. Obviously, we have our strengths and weaknesses, so some of us are better programmers, some of us are better designers, some of us are better artists, depending on what we're talking about. Luckily for us at the time, we had Michael as well, who knew how to make music and sound effects. So basically, we didn't have to outsource anything. We were able to make everything within the team. So we felt our team was already pretty well-rounded. And we weren't all one thing. We were multidisciplinary, so the teams were overlapped, so it made for a very tight-knit team, and as we like to say, a well-oiled machine. As for marketing that you brought up specifically, I'd never done any of that, and I had an interest in it, so I took the mantle of that in 4th year, and I went, and as part of our pitch, I suppose, to the class and to the profs, for our first presentation for our senior project, we were like, okay, we're gonna make this game. It's gonna have blah 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 blah, but also we're gonna try to do a marketing plan. We're gonna market it. We're gonna try to have a whole social media campaign, all that kind of stuff. Which is where I got my start in marketing, and I had no idea what I was doing. But coming out of that, I'd already been doing it for about a year. So I had somewhat of a basic knowledge of where to start. And since then, in the last 3 years, I guess since then, I've learned a lot, especially since it was our first release and now technically our second release on 2 different platforms. Just going to conventions is a huge learning process. Meeting other developers and talking with them and learning a lot. You get to you find little tidbits here and there that you realize, oh, that could work really well in my marketing plan. So just and on a development side of things, we've just gotten better with every iteration of the game, in every game jam as well. That's a huge learning event. And in 3 years, we've come a very, very long way, especially looking at those first early GIFs and pictures of Blobs, to see where it's come from. It's kind of baffling because we just forget how it used to be and look at how it is now.
Thank you. That all sounds very exciting.
It certainly is. Exciting is definitely a word for it. We gotten a couple new questions in the chat. CK2 guest, have you started development on a new game?
Yep.
Yes, we have. We can't really say much about it yet, but we have started development on a new game. We actually started it in the middle of working on Blobs, like we mentioned before. Big mistake. Don't do that.
But since then, Blobs has been getting less and less attention as we're finishing it up, and more and more attention to this new project. So
it was a mostly healthy segue, I think.
Yeah, we're not saying much.
Yeah.
I'm forbidding everyone from saying anything, but basically we're working on something else, and we're very excited.
Yes. And Astrobite asks, does the opportunity Epic Games provides indies with projects made in Unreal play a factor in the decision to switch, outside of other qualifications and experience? I think one of the big things that finally convinced everyone to switch, including the Unreal naysayers in the team, was the tech reveal for Unreal Engine 5. That just blew us all away, how nice everything was. And Nick has been singing the praises of Unreal to us for years, to basically a wall, until this Unreal Engine 5 demo came out, and we were all like, hey, maybe we should switch, because it was an interesting moment where we were learning these new things in Unreal, and more little things about Unreal were starting to frustrate us. For example,
Unity.
earlier...
You mean Unity?
Yeah, sorry, Unity. Why do they both have to start with U's? So, for example, earlier I mentioned that I'd started researching dots. And we were kind of prototyping some things using dots. But the biggest hurdle with that is that dots was very much pre-release. On top of a lot of other things in Unity that are pre-release, which means that it's next to impossible to find any good tutorials on YouTube on how to do things, because things consistently change. Documentation as well is pretty sparse because it's a new thing and it's not very well documented. And there's a handful of other reasons. One of the other reasons was the Unity's lighting pipelines. A lot of things are shifting around, and it's kind of hard to understand. And then, we were like, maybe all this new Unity stuff isn't really the right thing, and we were starting to have doubts. And then Unreal Engine 5 knocked on the door and was like, hey, look at all this cool stuff that we can do. And we were like, you know what? That's the final straw. That's going to break the camel's back. We're switching to Unreal.
Yeah, if I could just add something. Hi, David here on the development team. It was sort of like Unity was just throwing in new features that weren't really working. It was just becoming more and more of a mess. And then on the other hand, Unreal's like, look, hey, we've got our shit so together that we're like bringing it to new heights in Unreal 5. Like they had it so together and everything worked in Unreal compared to Unity, which was like increasingly not working. And we just sort of took a look around and went, wow, something needs to change here for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I will add, you said I was talking to a wall. That's not true. Walls don't fight back. I would talk to the wall, and the wall would punch me and say, "Wow, we've been using Unity forever. Why would we change?" So the lesson I'll leave there is, whatever you do, hold out for beautiful tech demos. Don't worry, your team will come around. Anyone can change.
Next, we're switching to RPG Maker, so it's fine.
Finally.
But of course, we can't set aside the fact that Epic Games is certainly doing an excellent job at marketing themselves to indies. Particularly the fact that they only take, what is it, like a 10 or 15% cut? Or is it 12? I think it's 12% on the Epic Games Store, compared to pretty much everywhere else, which is 30%.
Yeah, they're
that's
doing
a
good job.
big deal for indies.
Yeah. Okay, bye, Nick.
Nick has left the building.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yes.
Well, first, I guess I would like to commend you on not only starting but finishing a project, and then finishing it again to release it on Xbox. Like it's so hard to finish projects, and it's super awesome that you all had the strength to like carry on.
It took a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to tangent into that, actually, you mentioned how the release, the 2 year gap between like the Steam release and the Xbox release made it hard to like finish it. Again, how did you go about pushing through that?
I think it was Matt really that really kicked us in the butt and said, "Hey, we have to finish this. Like it needs to be done. We need to put this behind us and get it in the past."
Yeah, I do vaguely remember having a real serious talk with the team, and everyone went very silently, "Yeah, okay, you're right."
Yeah.
It wasn't a happy meeting.
It's basically
I think
just
that was a big one.
It's basically just a well-known fact that at least for us among the team that I wouldn't say disdain, but more lack of motivation and just general displeasure definitely increased working on the project as time increased. I'd say that's a pretty natural thing that happens to pretty much any game development team or game developer. But it's definitely something that's hard to get past. It's a lot of self motivation.
Mm-hmm.
It's the classic thing with the 90% and the 10%, right? Like, the 90% is always the super fun stuff. It's like adding mechanics and you're seeing this idea come to life, and then the 10% is like, okay, this is broken and we need to fix it. Okay, this is broken and we need to fix it. This doesn't quite work right. And that's just the worst part of the whole project, is the polish.
So for Blobs itself, it was harder. Now, luckily, like Tyson said, he took the brunt of the Xbox development. So generally speaking, it was out of most people's hair, except for when Tyson was like, a specific programming question that we could answer. But for the most part, since he took most of it on, we didn't know how the Xbox stuff worked anyway. So like even if we wanted to help, we'd have to be tutored into it. So really it was all on him to find the motivation in himself to do it. So I commend you for that, Tyson.
Don't do that, by the way. Do not do that. It's a bad idea. If you have a team that you can work with, absolutely use them.
Yeah. So now we've learned. So Blobs throughout development on numerous levels was a big learning experience, especially for something like motivation and keeping the momentum going. And one thing that we've implemented is for our new game is that in our Slack channel or in our Slack, whatever server, whatever you want to call it, we have a channel specifically called game name updates. And basically whenever someone does anything in the game, in there you can write, hey, here's an update on what I've done, or here's visually something cool that I've made. And that way we found that even though we're working online from home, it still gives us motivation of hey, that person did something cool, I want to contribute, or we're a little bit closer to the finalizing, to actually seeing the project come together. We're a bit closer, and it that helps a lot. Obviously with Blobs it was a little harder because a year of basically not seeing any difference is hard, but that's a strategy we're implementing now, and it seems to be working fairly well.
Here's the question: when's Blobs 2 coming out?
We've joked about that. I don't know.
There was a time when I was genuinely afraid that we were about to do what we did with our current quote unquote new project. I was worried we were going to do it again because there was a Slack thread that started a couple weeks ago where it was like, oh, imagine how much better Blobs would be if we made it in Unreal. And people started talking about like, oh, we can like quickly throw this together in Unreal. And I'm like, no. I see
What
where
have
this is
done? What have
going.
I done?
I see where this is going. Don't do it.
I would say ask us that question again after this next game and see if we have the motivation to go back to Blobs.
Yeah.
It's great though that your company now has a game under its belt. You can just like show that you've done this already.
I feel like having it on a console is also going to be beneficial for us for marketing to future consoles. Like when we marketed to Switch, we had a Steam release. That's it. There are a lot of Steam games, like a lot of Steam games, and we hadn't gone to a console yet. So we're a new studio. We've only just released this game. We're kind of an unknown element. We still are. But now we have an Xbox release under our belt, so that I'm hoping that makes us more marketable to Nintendo and/or PlayStation in the future.
Yeah. Does supporting Xbox include current and next gen? I believe it does.
That's a good question.
Doesn't it?
We haven't received dev kits for the next generation Xbox consoles because we aren't actually targeting that console. But, from what I understand from Xbox's marketing material, it should run on a Series X.
Yeah, like we have no reason to believe not, and I think somewhere it said that it does, but I don't quote us on that. I can't remember.
Uh-oh, Jared works at Xbox. I hope he haven't made you mad.
Dun dun dun.
I mean, it was the best experience ever. Let's change the title of the thing.
Yeah. For what it's worth,
bag is coming in the mail.
For what it's worth, I will say that Xbox has been a much stronger market for us than Steam was. We released our game on Xbox not really expecting a lot, and it blew us out of the water. How well we did.
Now,
quote unquote
keep in
well.
mind, that's relative to us.
Yeah.
To our past, but still, our Xbox release has been our best release ever. So, yeah, we're happy.
No judgment here.
Now we just have to wait for a Spanish YouTuber to upload a video about our game so we can get really popular in Spain again. Just like we did with Halen.
Yeah, that's right. We had a huge Spanish following for Halen. And we were like, okay, why? It's not even in Spanish. There's no text. What are you talking about? Yep. Very odd.
It's because it's free.
Well. Yeah, but specifically Spanish, though? I don't know. It's weird. I won't complain, but yeah. What's this general?
Oh,
just some random banter.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Tyson and Matt, and Nick and
David.
For coming by to talk about the Blobs Fight. This was like really, really cool to hear about, and to hear about all the work that you put in to finish this game and release it on Xbox. I found that extremely valuable, and it was a really, really great talk.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having us too and inviting us.
Yeah,
this is great.
It's
absolutely.
It's certainly validating for us.
We made a game, guys, and people like it.
Maybe we'll have you on in 3 years when you finish the next game.
There
Hopefully.
we go.
And it released on the Xbox 5 or 6. I'm not sure.
That's right.
Whatever they call it.
The Switch 3 and all of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much again to SkyPyre for coming by to talk about the Blobs Fight. Until next time. Bye.
All right.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.